now. I'm hoping the go. It's good. Are we good? All right. It looks like we're good. Hi, yes, hello, everyone. I'm Gavin.js. We today are going to be taking a look at this. Should have had that closed beforehand, but it's fine. This is a shell, obviously. Uh, this is an interesting project that I've been working on. It's basically done. Uh, it's an interesting project where I've discovered this blog post that goes through all of the math behind mollusk shells. If you're not familiar with a mollusk, I promise you are. That's the category of life, the phylum of life that includes octopi, squid, uh, snails, slugs, all those squishy little guys, right? Uh, it's a fun time. And so all mollusks uh, ancestrally had a shell. Thus, we can say that we can make any mollusk shell. Not all mollusks have a shell anymore. Octopi sure don't. Squid don't. Slugs don't. But snails do. Cuttlefish do, but it's more like an interior bone. Squid, I guess, do. It's also an interior bone. And most notably, the nautilus is a mollusk. I love nautilus shells. They're famous for being, the golden spiral and all that. They're pretty close to being a golden spiral. They're all unique, but whatever. Anyway, it's all the same math that makes this shell and this shell. This is just a random bivalve. I have no idea what kind. But any and all mollusk shells use the same math, as if they can do math, to construct their shell. And today, what we're going to do is go through that math and show you how to make literally any shell you can think of in Blender. So we have this shell here. I'm hoping that we've got it in Eevee. It should be fast to render, so if I play with the parameters, it shouldn't be a big deal. But so let's select this shell, and these are all of the parameters we're going to need. Not necessarily all of them, depends on how far we get into it today. But if we adjust any of these, like if we adjust the alpha, that's how quickly it spirals. We can adjust that. We can adjust beta, which is the angle. Well, I'll get into what each of these parameters do in a hot second, but we can adjust all of these so that we can make literally any any shell we want to. They can be a little touchy. I'm also just playing with them willy-nilly without much of a plan. And my computer is struggling just a touch. It's struggling because, doing a lot of things, but regardless, hold on one second, just making sure everything's running smoothly. There we go. So we have a bunch of parameters. We're going to go through the math because it's really fun. And I think it's fun and interesting to be able to make any snail shell. It's a fun exercise in procedural modeling. It's also just neat to be able to do any of that. I was using this for a while in combination with another project that I did where I was using a 3D printer to draw things that I made in Blender. So I converted this from a 3D model into a bunch of grease pencil curves, or really just curves, so that then I could convert that into G code and drawing it on a 3D printer. Really fun project. Might do that one of these days live, where we have a 3D printer cam set up and we're using Blender to generate G code. But that's not for today. Today we're going to discuss these shells. So let me pull my notes off to the side here and we will open up this brand new Blender file. Give me 1 second while I make sure everything's good here. And also I pull up the relevant nodes because I don't want to just stare at a shell over on the other screen. I actually need the math pulled up because we're going to be doing just some fun math. Like genuinely, it is an interesting series of equations that make these shells. So, okay. Yeah, so without further ado, what we're going to do is the traditional sacrifice of the default cube. And then we're going to bring up, well, really any piece of geometry because it doesn't matter what it is. We're going to, oh, hello, long time no see. No kidding. How's it going, dude? But okay, so we've got our geometry for which to add some nodes to. And what we're going to do is, for now, get rid of the group input. That's going to be important here later. Actually, in addition to getting rid of the group input, we're also going to get rid of the geometry input, because we don't need that. We need no geometry whatsoever. Instead, what we need is a curve line. Line, curve line. This is going to be the start of our shell. It doesn't look like much right now, but that's because we haven't told it to do anything, right? It's just a curve line, and the most important thing to do right as soon as you've made a curve line is to turn on snapping. Make sure everything's nice on the grid. It bothers me when things are just floating around willy-nilly. But the first thing we need to do is resample our curve. That's incredibly important. I'm going to leave this on count and just bump it up something decently large, like 128. Adjust the resolution as need be, of course, but that should be enough to get us going. Now, the first thing we need to do is convert this line into polar coordinates. In order to do that, we're going to do a little bit of sine and cosine. You know, the general equation for a circle, or at least one of them, right? So, pull up my pen here. So we're going to have, so in this method of converting from Cartesian to polar coordinates, we're going to have x equal cosine of theta, right? And y equals sine of theta. But what is theta, I hear you ask in my head, because I'm psychic like that. Theta is the angle in polar coordinates, right? But we don't have a theta right now. Instead, what we're going to use is the factor. It's very important that we have a curve line here and not a mesh line, because meshes don't have factors. And what is a factor? It is the measure of how far along the curve a point is, from 0 to 1. 0 being the very start, 1 being the very end. So we can pull up a parameter node. Nothing to, and make sure we're done with the annotation tool. But we have our spline parameter, and we're actually going to store a named attribute, because we need to store this as theta. Real quick, because I think it's fun and fancy. No, computer, why are you doing that? I've got this website here that lets you copy Greek characters. So we can copy theta and then plug that directly into our named attribute. So now we literally have an attribute called theta. Anyway, this stores our factor on our geometry so that we're able to play with it and convert it into something that's a little bit more usable. What would make it a bit more usable? Well, if it were in the proper range of values. We want this to range from 0 to 2 pi, or tau. So we're going to use math, multiply our factor by tau. You can literally type in TAU and it'll bring up the value 2 pi in Blender. And we're just going to multiply that, and now we have our factor in terms of polar coordinates. So if we use that and a set position node, a little bit more math, because we need our cosine and our sine, and then a combine XYZ node. And something to note real quick, I know there is a combine and separate spherical node. We're not going to use that. Deliberately, we're not using that today, because the way we're going to play with this in the blog post that I found all of this math from originally uses everything in, like, converts it manually from Cartesian to polar. And if, like, technically we do all of it in polar, but it'll get confusing towards some of the last steps. So for right now, we're just going to say, hey, yep, we're doing all of the math to manually convert it from Cartesian to polar coordinates. So we're going to plug our theta. Oh, yeah, no, wait. This would work, but it's not the point, right? The point is to have this. Did you try to ask Claude to build you? I tried that a couple of days and it did it like I wanted it. Interesting. I am pretty anti AI personally. We could get into that. I'm open to like if you have good suggestions and things, like I'd be happy to discuss that. Maybe not today necessarily unless we have time or I just have a bunch of things that I have to get done while we're doing this. But no, I've never asked AI to build a node network for me. I'm glad it's working for you, but nah, I think it's like it's not just that like AI big bad. Also, I think it's important to understand the nitty gritty of the nodes. Like I'm the guy who's literally reading the manual to figure out okay where are all the ways that I can manipulate the way that this system works to best get the results I'm really looking for. So no, I've not looked into it, but I'm glad it's working out for you. Have fun with it. But okay, so we're going to take this, set the position, and since we have the viewer node, we're not seeing that we have now drawn a complete circle. So, with this circle, we're now able to do a few things. And let me take a second to collect my thoughts here, look at where we're at. So yeah, that's the easiest part of this, right? The easiest part is to just draw a circle. But how do we convert this circle into something that's a little bit more shell-shaped, right? Let me just label this real quick before I, get lost in my nodes here. There we go. Okay, so how do we get this to be something a little bit more interesting? Well, shells are what we call, well, they form a, and I just blanked on the word. Wow, very professional. Yeah, I agree with you, and I also rarely use it with Blender. Yeah, yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think there's nothing wrong with using it every now and again. I just try not to rely on it at all. But and yeah, I don't even know how you would get it to work with Blender other than just like asking it, "Hey, how do I do things?" Uh, but again, cool. I hope you have fun with it. The whole point of all of this is to make art and to have fun. So, but what was I saying? We're going to use this to make a logarithmic spiral, which means that the angle, like the tangent of the spiral, is going to maintain the same all the way along the spiral, which then necessarily means that the radius of the spiral increases logarithmically. Hence the name. So, how do we do that? Uh, that all relies on polar coordinates, which I have not fully explained. I guess we should talk a little bit about polar coordinates and the difference between polar coordinates and Cartesian coordinates. So in Cartesian coordinates, I don't want to erase, I want to annotate. In Cartesian coordinates, we have x, y, and z coordinates, right? In polar coordinates, we have an which one do I want to say first? We have an angle and we have a radius. And that's how we're able to draw this circle, right? So if we were to be proper about all of this, we would do a scale node and we could use this to then adjust the radius, right? So we have our angle here, we have our radius here, and now we can draw any circle we want to. Very fun. But if we want to do a spiral instead, we need some variable for our radius. And that's where the logarithmic spiral comes in, right? We need, hold on, let me pull this up because I had it off the top of my head recently, but it's been a minute since I've fully looked in or like fully done this from scratch. Okay, so in order to do this, we're going to follow the format of a logarithmic spiral. I should really look up the shortcuts for annotation. So for a logarithmic spiral, we have r equals, I'm trying to think here. I believe it's okay, so some constant, right, so that we're multiplying nope, not theta, e to the b b theta. That's the formal definition of a logarithmic spiral, if I've remembered it correctly. But we're going to manipulate it just a little bit, because if we were to do it like that, we wouldn't have very good control of our spiral. In fact, we could do that very quickly by getting rid of the scale. Do, 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 do. Sorry, I'm just pausing because I'm like, oh man, where do I want to go with this actually? I should have thought through some of the order of the ways that I wanted to discuss all of this, because there's a lot to it, and I don't want to just drown in math, because if we don't have a direction, then I could just ramble about equations forever and get nowhere, right? So, yeah, no, we need to find our, okay. Yeah, so we need our logarithmic equation to set the radius. In order to do that, we're going to need a lot of math nodes. Two. One of the nice things about Blender is it has all of these different functions that we can use, and one of them is the exponent function. That is easy to confuse with the power function. Power literally has a base and an exponent, so if you set the exponent to 2, you're squaring everything. If you set it to 3, you're cubing. You can have any exponent you want and any base. But if you switch to exponents, now suddenly you only have a value. This is your exponent. So what's going on here, right? This is doing e to the power of whatever. So in our logarithmic equation, which I maybe shouldn't have erased, but whatever, this would be e to theta. Unparent that with Alt P. So theta into exponent. But that's not all we're going to do. So, God, I'm looking at this node setup and I'm like, how do I explain this? I really should just write the equation again so that we have something to reference. So, our radius equals k. Nope, I did it again. K e to the b theta. So we have a constant to multiply everything by, that really just sets the radius at which, when we have an angle of 0, so how wide it would open. We have b, which is a multiplier for our theta, so how many times around in all, well, what angle to set it to. Again, this is not very clear what we're doing, so we're going to change things around so that r equals k, which we're going to rewrite as a in a minute. But skipping that for a moment. E to the, what do we have? A tangent of, well, it's not going to be theta. It's going to be alpha times theta. What does this do? This is remember how I said a spiral, in a logarithmic spiral, maintains a constant tangent to the curve? The angle between the center position of the spiral and the position along the curve, the angle between that and the angle between that is always constant. So this makes it so that we can have an angle that's easier to manipulate than just some random value. It'll make sense once I actually plug in all of the nodes. But this is the equation that we want to work with. So, oh, and if you want to see these equations while I'm doing this, if I erase everything and whatnot, I do have a link in the description to the original blog post and my own blog post discussing this in further detail than I'm probably going to cover while doing this live. So, anyway, we're going to get rid of theta for a hot second. So we have our E. We need to take some value, which is going to be our alpha. that's what we're going to call this because it's an angle. It's going to be alpha. We'll set it to something something familiar like 90. That's in degrees, so we need to go degrees to nope, 2 radians. There we go. And 90, you will notice, is of course a right angle, which means that we're going to still be drawing a circle if we leave this at 90. That's why we're starting there. Then we're going to plug that into our arctangent, which is not a function that we have. If you take a look here, can I zoom in on that at all? There we go. In our trigonometric functions, we have arcsine, arccosine. Did they change that? I swear. I swear that wasn't a thing when I did this before. Maybe I'm just misremembering. What I have in my notes is that I took 1 over the tangent of this function. But this should, we'll see if this works. And if not, we'll switch it back over to the way that I have it in my notes. So we have alpha converted to radians, the arctangent of alpha, and now we need to multiply that by our theta. And that is our exponent, and then we'll just multiply it again by some constant. We'll set it to 1 for now, just so that we don't get a weird value when theta is 0. But okay, so that is our scale, and now we have a logarithmic spiral. It's weirdly large at the moment. And I think that has something to do with this function not actually being the way that I expect it to be. So we're going to go back to taking the tangent and doing a tangent of this and divide 1 over that. Now if we reset that to 90, there we go. Okay, that's much better. There we go. Okay, yeah. There's a difference between... I always get confused with arctan because they're... The way that you write it, there's nuance that I always forget. It's one of those things that comes up so rarely that I never manage to remember. Anyway, the point is that if we plug in 90 for our angle, our tangent is at a perfect right angle with the position vector. So we get a circle. The radius doesn't change. If we decrease it, we get an increasing radius because our angle, I believe it's the angle this direction. So this angle is smaller than 90. And then if we increase it above 90, it's going like this. So it's the interior is getting smaller, as opposed to we have a maximum of 1 as our radius. 1 being where it's at where theta is at 0. We can of course increase this multiplier so that we increase or decrease the radius at 0. And so we have nice, easy control over our logarithmic spiral. And that's basically it. The only additional thing we could have here is if where we store our theta, we could multiply this again by some value that would be the number of turns, the number of rotations that we have for our spiral, because we're increasing, the amount of tau that we have. So now that we have that, let's group all of this together and create some inputs, right? No, I don't want to group. I want to frame that. So we have the radius of the spiral. I'll call it a spiral for now. I tend to switch between spiral and helix. It's the same thing, but so now we have the two components that we need for to draw a spiral. We have our position and we have our radius. That is incredibly important. Why not use the spiral node? Ooh, excellent question. So, there's a very important detail about the spiral node. If you pull this up and we take a look at it, this is not a logarithmic spiral. There are two kinds of spiral. You have logarithmic, which is what we're making and what doesn't have a primitive in geometry nodes, and we have the Archimedes spiral. The difference is that our spiral, the logarithmic spiral, you can see that the radius changes as you go up or down the spiral. And the other spiral, this is an Archimedean spiral. I don't know if I already said that, but this is an Archimedes spiral. And so the difference is that it maintains a constant increase in the radius. Did I say that well? Does that make sense? So the angle will change as you go along here. The angle between the position and the tangent will change, but the amount that the radius increases is constant. They're sort of inverses to one another in that way. So yeah, no, you can't make the kind of spiral that we're looking for with this primitive. Yeah, good. Sorry to maybe over explain that, but no, that's something I meant to bring up, so I'm glad you asked. Thank you so much. But okay, so we have our position and we have our radius. What's important to know is that that's basically all we need for everything we're going to do from here on out. It's going to get more complex as we add terms to this, but this is our basic equation, is to have some position as a vector and then a radius. So let me erase all of our stuff on the logarithmic spiral. Yours looks like the golden ratio 1. Exactly. And that's what we're trying to make here. So now that we have this in place, I need to write this somewhere because I'm going to reference it a lot. We always need so our position, now I need to write it the other way around. So our position times our radius. Does that make sense? This is maybe equals the position. Maybe just get rid of the equals, but we always need a position and a radius. That's all we need to work with our spiral here to make our shell. And so we're going to extend this now into 3D. Get rid of our annotation turn tool. We're going to extend this into 3D. So we need a Z component for our position. The thing is, it's not going to be spherical, right? If we were, we would just add, well, it would be a little bit more complicated, but they should update the spiral node to support the one you were making. I agree. I actually have made a custom node. This is something that I made, so I get this. And like it's got all of the parameters that we would want here. So this is if we were to do this and actually hop into it. So we've got a logarithmic. This is the logarithmic spiral formula. We're going to get into this. But this is jumping ahead just a little bit. But yeah, you can make your own custom node. And I agree, it should also be a default. I guess I could look into how to, add to Blender's development. I know that's a thing that you can do is just like propose features and whatnot, or really just make them if you have the know-how. That would be really fun. Makes me feel a little bit weird to do that because it's not like I made this, but eh. Anyway, so we need to expand this to be in 3D. Making sure I'm not getting too lost in the sauce here. I'm also trying to make sure, like, okay, should I go ahead and make a parameter for this now? I feel like maybe. So we're going to make a group input node. Actually, yeah, I'm just going to take a hot second, organize all of this, because if we don't, it's going to get a little bit complicated. So let's group this. Now we can have, oops, this value input be our alpha. Going to pull up the Greek characters that I have here. So we need that. I'm also going to replace this named attribute with another group attribute input to make it a little bit more dynamic. Name that theta. We're going to do a little bit more housekeeping and set this to a default of 0? That feels wrong. Pi? It doesn't really matter, but I want to make sure that the minimum is 0. You can't really have a negative. I guess you can. Alright, it doesn't matter anyway. Point is, we're just setting up some inputs here. Sure, that can be negative, but we want it to default to 90 so that it... Nah, we'll default to 100 so that we know it's a logarithmic spiral and not just a circle. Theta needs to be a field, but alpha needs to be a single value. It doesn't need to be, but it makes it a little clearer if we label it as such. And then we need one more input node here for this value. In the formal logarithmic spiral equation, it's usually labeled as k, but the blog post that I pulled a lot of this from labels it as a. I think it makes me think of aperture, so the opening of the shell. So I'm just going to label it as a. Control H to hide all of the unnecessary inputs on all of those nodes. Now we have our basic radius, our logarithmic radius. There we go. That's our output. And that's everything there. So now we have our group node. I should label this node group log. I'm just going to call it lag. Log R. If I could type, that would be so great. Anyway. Did I do that in the wrong... Did that on the wrong thing. I always get confused, like, between labeling it here or there. Like, this is for the greater node group that we're working with. This is for the specific group. How dare I get confused about the thing that I claim to be an expert in. Anyway, so that is our logarithmic radius. Now we can use our group input again to create our alpha value and our A. I could probably get really into the weeds of how would I organize this. Should I put theta at the bottom? I'm gonna put theta at the bottom. I can't help myself. It's got to be at the bottom because that is our field, because A is also going to be a single value. There we go. Okay. Now we can have our named attribute. Did you try the new sample frequency node? It is so cool. I have not. I haven't played with any of the sound stuff that they've done. I actually have been really bad at keeping up with the updates, which is pretty bad, but I figure out what I want, what I need to learn as I'm, figuring out what I want to do these days. Mostly because while I was trying to keep up with every single update as they were rolling them out, I got real overwhelmed with it really fast. So I haven't played with it yet, but it would be fun to play with. I should probably do that and maybe do a live stream talking about it. That would be fun. Uh, anyway, so we're going to now expand. Wait, hold on. Hold on. Okay. There we go. I forgot it didn't inherit. It should have inherited the defaults, but whatever. Just need to make sure that everything is a-okay. There we go. Label this while I'm at it. Okay, cool. So that is that. Now we're going to expand everything to be in 3D. Yeah, great idea. Yeah, that would be fun. I've been trying to think of more things to do live too because uh, I want to do this more regularly. It's been a while since I was doing live streams, and uh, I want to fix that. Anyway, so now what we're going to do is expand this into 3D. I know I keep saying that, and then I keep getting distracted. But the way we're going to do this is by, instead of doing anything in a radial sense, we're going to expand it downward along the Z, somewhat linearly. Because if you think about a snail shell, typically they're very cone-like, right? So we're just going to increase on the Z as we go along the curve. It's not going to look very radial for a second because we still have some trig involved, but I'm just going to copy this down real quick because I'm looking over my notes. I'm like, what the heck am I doing here? Spiral position. That cannot possibly be helix position. Okay. Sign of the. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I should have reviewed this spot specifically because the way we're going to make this a cone is by creating an angle between our current position. Like we're going to offset everything along. Uh, we're going to decrease the Z position, and then we also need to rotate it outward so that it forms a cone. If that makes sense. So in order to do that, we need some value. We're going to call. I'm going to make a value node. We need some value we're going to call beta in a minute. Set it to 20 degrees or something like that. 2 radians. So we need to do the conversion. And then we need to take the sine of that angle. This will be to offset the x and y components of our angle. So, or not sine of that, what am I doing? So we're going to multiply both of these by the sine of this angle, and you'll see that that squishes it in a little bit. That's to compensate for how much is going to spread back out as we bring it down on the Z. So we'll bring in another multiply node, bring those down, try and keep this at least a little bit organized. There we go. And then what we're going to do is not only take the sine, that's just to make sure that x and y are consistent. We now need the cosine of this angle. And we're going to... Oh, yes. And we're going to multiply... I'm just trying to think of how do I say this. We'll need a multiply node, but for right now, we'll just multiply it by 1 because this is just going to get plugged straight into our Z. But you can tell it goes up. It looks a little bit nicer when it goes down, so we'll multiply it by -1, and now we've got that cone that I was talking about forming. So we can adjust this angle. A greater angle will flatten it out. It's 90 degrees here because we're multiplying it by Z. we're multiplying, excuse me, we're plugging the angle into sine. So when sine is 90, it's 0. So we have, it's 1. So we're not going to be adjusting the x and y. And it's, and when in the cosine function at 90, it's 0. So we're not offsetting it on the z. And so if we increase this all the way down to 0, then we get a straight line again. And that's the range at which we're manipulating the z component. Now, I said we needed to multiply this by some amount, right? We actually need our a, because that's the aperture amount, right? That's the amount that we're going to multiply this to make sure that we have the to make sure that it stays the right radius for the aperture that we're setting. So we're going to multiply a by -1 to maintain the direction and then plug that in. Right now, a is 1. If we increase it or decrease it, we're increasing the aperture, which necessarily means that we're going to move our points down to make room for that aperture. And I hope it makes sense why I was having a hard time thinking about, okay, how do I say all of that in a succinct way that isn't just like, let's just do the flippin' math. Anyway, we need a new input node. We're going to call this beta because we already have an alpha. Plug that into our degrees. Beta. Bring that up above our A so that we have it next to alpha. This is also going to be a single value. And I should note, when you really get in, because we're doing such fine level of detail in making all of this, if you really want to play with this later on, you can convert all of these back from single values into fields so that you can have functions that like change the alpha as you go along. It just won't be a logarithmic spiral anymore, but you could have something that like animates over time, or I don't know. There are so many ways you could play with this. It's really fun. I just don't have an application for that, and I don't see a reason to make these fields yet. But I just wanted to let you know that that is perfectly possible. Anyway, we're going to group that in there. Why don't we set a default of what, 45? Sure, that's not the prettiest spiral, but it'll do. And yeah, so that is now the position of our helix. This is the spiral that is basically the central column? The central spiral for our shell. Everything from here is going to be creating the surface of our shell as opposed to that main curve. Let me just group all of this together so that we have a nice group to play with as opposed to, a bunch of nodes all flying all around everywhere. We're going to rename this to spiral. And I want to rename the node group to spiral pose. Oh, hello. How's it going? Hope everything is well. Just going through all of the Mollusk math that I've been writing about over the last, well, it was a few weeks ago, but I spent several weeks making blog posts discussing all of this math. So if you come in late, or if, for whatever reason you need to reference this later, I only have the live stream to reference, but also my blog posts on Patreon, link in the description. They are available for free. You don't even have to become a free member in order to see them. They are publicly available. Anyway, so now we have the two components that we need for a logarithmic spiral: the position and the radius. We're scaling the position by the radius, and this is all based on theta so far. But this is not a shell. This is just a spiral. So how do we expand this to be a shell? Well, The simple answer is to make it two-dimensional. I know this is three-dimensional, but we have one line. We have one factor. And so, in a way, you can think of this as being one-dimensional. We need now two lines so that we can create a surface and another equation to make the shape of the aperture. So, what we're going to do is just duplicate this line. We're also going to store, well, hold on a second, because there are a number of ways that I could just duplicate a line. Let me see how I did it before so I don't get too far off track. No, yeah. Like, I'm debating whether or not it's worth just splitting this off, but I think it doesn't really matter if we create a new line node or not. Anyway, we're going to definitely resample this line. We're going to store another factor, but this time we're going to call it sigma. And I'm looking at my notes and I'm realizing I used capture attribute nodes before using the store named attributes. I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters. If we run into an issue, then I'll go back and do it the other way around. But we should be able to store the named attribute. No, we have to use a capture attribute node. We have to use a capture attribute node. Okay. It worked fine because we were just using the line directly. Now, we need to convert these two lines into a mesh. So we're going to use the curve to mesh node before the set position node. In fact, let's turn off the set position node so that we can all see, what all's happening here. So this curve is going to be the curve, and then the other one is going to be the profile curve. Plug this into, well, don't need that for a moment. And so it disappears, right? That's because these two lines are the same. This is not necessary, but I think it's fun to show that, yes, this is a 2D surface. If we make our lines perpendicular to one another, we get this surface. So now we're going to use a capture attribute node and the factor node. Disconnect this for a moment. We'll bring it back in, don't worry. But we're going to use two capture attribute nodes to capture the factor on both of our lines. Now, and it doesn't really matter which one's which, so I'm just going to reverse that so that screw it. I'll reverse it this way. Node organization is incredibly important, but it gets tedious while doing it live. Anyway, so we've got that. So now we have our factor stored on both of these. We're going to restore this math that we did before to our main curve so that we can now store our theta as a named attribute. Plug that in there. Then we're going to do some similar math to create another angle, which will be going around the opening of the shell. I wish I had a snail shell to demonstrate, but going around the opening of the shell. Use the closure zone for using the same setup in different places. It's not going to be the same setup. Well, it might. I've not played with closures because I don't see a lot of advantage to them, but maybe I'm just not. Maybe my imagination is a little bit limited. So if you have ideas as to how I could use that in this case, please let me know. I'd be happy to play around with it. But for the moment, we're going to take this, plug it into here, and we're only going to multiply by tau. We don't need an additional multiplication because this is basically, we're going to start off with a circle. We only need 360 degrees, so we can plug that in to not theta because we'll be overriding that. I chose sigma as the Greek for this term. And yeah, that's all there is there. So now we have both of our factors Again, we could probably use the same line, but whatever, I wanted to show the surface here. So we have our theta, we have our sigma. If we turn on set position, nothing happens. Why is nothing happening? It should have gone back to being a curve. Well, not a curve, but mm, hold on one second while I figure out what I've done wrong here. Like instead of duplicating the line. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, again, I could. Well, I don't know. Is that worth it? Like, let me. And if I could type. So you're saying we could have a curve line sit inside here, and then it would be a resample. Because this is the thing that I would want to have different. I haven't adjusted it here, but I do want to have a different amount of points. And then capture the attribute. And we could take this, plug in our geometry and parameter or factor. So then we have a closure. And then what is it? Evaluate closure. I've looked into them a number of times. I just haven't done a lot with them like because I haven't like had a huge use case. Okay. Okay, all right. We'll say 64 and we're learning. We're learning on the spot. Okay. Okay, okay. So now I can replace that like if we just plug this into the curve to mesh node. I see some orange pixels here, but it looks like it's struggling. Maybe if I have the end vector so that we can need to refresh it here. There we go. So now it's set to 0. We'll set that to 1. 1. Okay. Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, I'm literally only going to use this right here at the beginning, but I appreciate you mentioning it and taking a moment because I've genuinely, like, I've tried to use them, but I don't think I was quite understanding what they're meant for when they first came out. So, like, this is cool. I don't know that I would use it right here because it is literally the first thing we're doing. Uh, but no, that's cool. I appreciate it. So anyway, I'm going to just set that aside for reference. We don't need it though right now. What I'm more interested in is, oh, okay, it is working, but not when we set position. Why not? What have I done wrong? We have a factor and factor, multiplying them. That should all be okay. Doing all of the math, set position. I tried to understand the difference between closure zone and node groups. In my opinion, the main advantage is that it's simpler to control. That's fair. Like I think there are definitely use cases. I just haven't run across them yet. Like honestly, there's a huge project that I've been whittling away at in the background for a long time that closures may actually be the way. I just need to play with it a little bit more. But yeah, and I would be happy to use them here. It's literally the first thing we're doing, so we don't need the flexibility of a closure here. But again, I really appreciate like doing that with you guys and like just seeing how it would work in this case. Anyway, I really need to figure out why this position is not being set appropriately. Is it because there's no theta? That may be it. Like on our second curve here, we're not storing theta. It would be 0 because it's not got anything to do with this factor. And I think that's the problem. So it's both simple and a difficult node concept. That makes me feel better. I agree. It feels like it should be straightforward, and I'm having a hard time with it. But I'm sure once it clicks, it'll be very simple. So I appreciate that. Um, gotta read my own nodes. So that's going in there. That's going in there. For most use cases, I think closure node groups are largely the same. In fact, that you can closure and mini. That's true. That's very true. Uh, oh, oh, that's such a. Oh my god, that's such a good point. Closures and menus. Oh, that's probably like the way to use them. Uh, I should. Oh, I'm gonna play around with that after I get done streaming. Cause oh boy, if that's the case, because that changed some things around for some of my projects. Um. Okay, hold on, real quick. Here are my notes. So I've got this line and this line. We're storing the factor. I just need to show you guys this because I'm like, okay, what am I doing different than what I did in my notes? The most common use for me is whenever I want to solidify something in different place. Oh, that's a good point. I like that. But okay, we're storing the theta after multiplying it to have the number of rotations. And that's based on this factor. Don't worry about that. That just goes off to another factor. And then this factor multiplies to be the sigma. Okay. It should be the same thing. It should be the same flippin' thing. This there to do the math, to store this, and to store that. Yeah. Don't know why the position is being weird. What have I done differently? How embarrassing. Let me just real quick. Okay. Okay. It is working correctly. It's just not rendering because now we have a surface and we haven't offset the surface. And I was in my head expecting it to be an orange outline like we see with a curve, but we don't have that because now it is a mesh. Okay, I'm not crazy. I have done it correctly. We just can't see it yet. So in order for us to see it, we now need to use our sigma to offset the surface from that central column, right? The central spiral. In order to do that, we need an ellipse. That's how we're going to do this, is by creating an ellipse. We could just use a circle. So we'll do a little bit of math just to like, I really just want it to be visible again. So real quick, I'm just going to do that. We're going to bring in another named attribute. We're going to use the sigma, plug that into there. Combine X, Y, Z. Again, I know we have a spherical node, but we're deliberately not using it. And then we're going to add. Is it add? We're gonna say it's add. I could check my notes, but yes. The ellipse position PE scaled added. Okay, yes. We're going to add, not there though, we're going to add the position before scaling by the radius so that we should see, there we go. Of course, the circle isn't oriented correctly, but now we can see our mesh. So we're going to just put that perpendicular to how we are viewing it. This is not how it's going to look. I just really wanted to get the mesh to be visible again. So now we're going to discuss how we're going to get the ellipse, the equation for an ellipse to then add to the position so that we have the proper shape for our shell. In order to do that, ellipse position. There we go. Okay. Oh, oh boy, right. Oh, this is the fun one. All right, I can't reference that part of my notes. I know this means nothing to you because nothing's happening on screen. Hold on 1 second because this is where we're going to start really, it's going to get real complicated real fast. So we need the ellipse position. We're going to take basically this to start off with. We're going to switch we're going to go back to what we had before and then switch y to cosine. So now it's doing that. And then we need to introduce sine for z. That's still not correct. So that's not correct because our circle, I know it's not quite a circle. Bear with me for a second. It's oriented one direction for the entire spiral. We want it to rotate around the spiral as we move up the spiral. So we need to introduce theta to each of our terms in different ways. So I'm going to unfortunately hand wave a little bit of the trig here. I encourage you to play around with it. Do play with this at home, kids. Anyway, we're going to take the cosine of sigma, cosine of theta. We're going to multiply those together. Not divide, multiply. There we go. For x, it's going to look crazy for a minute, but we're going to duplicate that same logic for y. Cosine and sine for y, multiply into y. There we go. And now z, ever the outlier in this system, is simply going to be the sine of sigma. There we go. Now we have a circle that's properly oriented in order to spin around with our spiral, right? We can adjust all of these parameters. If we increase the aperture, then because the radius of the aperture right now is 1, if the aperture is also 1, the distance that the opening of the spiral is 1, so is the radius of the ellipse. They overlap, so you couldn't see any of the interesting stuff up here at the top of the shell. Now we can because we've increased the aperture. The next thing we're going to want to do is oh god. Oh, it's going to get so messy so fast, but it's fine. The next thing we're going to want to do is exactly what I was just talking about. Adjust the radius of our ellipse. I say ellipse because right now it's a circle, special kind of ellipse. And by adjusting the radius, we're able to really make it into an ellipse. Oh, hey, thanks. I appreciate it. It's going to get so flippin' crazy. Oh, man, I'm kind of dreading the next few steps. But first, we need to make the radius of the ellipse. So I'm going to label this. Otherwise, I'm going to lose track of what I'm doing. Ellipse, pose, simple. It's gonna get so much more complicated. Oh no. But it's fine. Okay, so in order to do the ellipse, we're going to bring in sigma for starters. And oh man, let me pull up the equation for an ellipse. Because we're doing it in a somewhat unorthodox way, the way we're going to do this. is bring up annotate. There we go. Oh man, I'm just directly copying this from the blog post for a moment because oh boy. So the radius of our ellipse is going to be equal to the cosine. Okay, so cosine here meaning x basically of sigma. That looks too much like a 6 sigma over a. If you're familiar with the equation for an ellipse, that's going to be one of the axes, right? Uh, all of that squared plus, should be giving myself more space, plus the sine, so the y of sigma, whatever, that one looks like a 6, but it's fine, over b, so the other axis, all of that squared, and then all of this to the square root, so to the negative 1/2, equivalent to a square root. So how do we do that in nodes, right? The way we're going to do this is by bringing in, well, we're just going to do it. I don't know if y'all want me to talk through, order of operations with nodes or not. I also struggle to do things and speak, so apologies if I struggle to say things while I need a second to just focus on, okay, how do we do this? So we're going to take cosine of sigma, all of that, divided by a. We're going to set that to 1 for a moment. We'll make it an input in a second. I don't think you want that's 1 over square root. That's a great point. And now I feel so much better because I've struggled with, okay, what does that mean? It's because I was misreading it. You're right. It is 1 over the square root, the inverse square root. Do I have that? I do have that. Okay, no. Past me has it correct in the notes. Current me is an idiot some days. But thank you. Good catch. It will be the inverse square root. I misspoke. But okay, so we have cosine over a. I'm just going to call this a real quick, otherwise I will forget it. And that is going to be multiplied because I don't want to take the power of it. Just multiply it by itself a little bit better. This could be another place where potentially we use a closure, but I don't think it's actually that big of a deal. We're going to call this B. It's the same thing. Yeah, no, it wouldn't work for a closure. I don't know. Now I'm just fixated on that a little bit. But anyway, we're going to take our A, B, and we're going to add them together, right? Yes. And then all of that to the inverse square root. Nice. Don't mind me while I cosplay as a mathematician, because sometimes I get things mixed up. Anyway, so that is going to be the radius for an ellipse, which means we can use this to scale the position of our ellipse. Plug that in. And now if we adjust A or B, we have finer control over the aperture of our shell. Excitement. This is where it really starts to feel cool, right? Like it would be one thing if it were just always a circle, but we can do so much better than that. And technically we could, if we wanted more customizable control, instead of doing the equations and all of this for specifically an ellipse, you could technically take like a curved circle and read the position of that and you'd still have to manipulate it some. You couldn't plug it in directly. But technically, you could do that, or like have an object that, like a Bezier or a NURBS object in the scene that it reads. That would work too, but I think it's fun to do the equations and whatnot. Uh, and it's a little bit more, well, there's just pros and cons. Anyway, going to frame that. This is going to be ellipse radius. If I could type, that'd be great. There we go. Cool. And now let's just make a couple of well, the position is, we're not going to do that with the position just yet. This one we can go ahead and group. We'll replace A with this and that. Set them to 0.5s. Excuse me. 0.5 is just fine. Give it a minimum of 0. We don't need these to be negative ever. Set them to single, 0, A, B. We'll call this group ellipse radius. I've forgotten what my naming convention has been for the other groups, but it's fine. This will do for now. Oh, and we need to get rid of sigma. Make this also an input. Clean this up a touch. And there we go. Yeah, good enough. Just need to name this appropriately. Keep doing that. There we go. Okay. So that's our ellipse radius. And just need sigma. Unparent that. Plug that into there. And now we have these values. I'm also going to do another group input. A and B. I should really rename all of these things so that it's a little bit clearer. Maybe do that towards the end. Really refine the inputs so that it's easy to keep track of. Ideally, we'd make gizmos to control all of these inputs, but that's a little easier said than done. Anyway, so we've got this, we've got that. The next thing, well, would be to maybe make it look a little bit, it doesn't matter. The next thing is, well, this is the part that I've been looking forward to the least, because what if, say, we want to rotate the aperture? Because right now it's just perfectly flat on the XZ axis, plane. But what if we want it to not be? What if we want to rotate it this way, or, that way, or really any direction? Well then, my friends, we need a little bit more trig. A little bit more trig. That's going to be so much fun to explain. Okay. Okay. Okay, okay, okay. It's fine. We'll get through it. Okay. So, in order to do that, we need to introduce a couple of angles. These angles will fundamentally add and subtract from our theta and our sigma in order to offset where they're at on that 2D plane that is, theta and sigma. Basically what the basically this plane, right? But in order to do it on all three axes, it's more complicated than just that simple explanation. So let's make sure we have plenty of space here because, oh boy. Oh boy. Okay, so in order to rotate this on two axes, it's fairly straightforward. Basically, what I said is true. We're just going to add some value. This will be an angle, but we'll just add that to both of our angles here. Adding 0 means that we'll have exactly the same shell, but if we adjust, forget which one this is. Okay, we're not going to do that one right now. If we adjust this, we're rotating it around the z-axis. And then let me make the difference between A and B a little bit more exaggerated, because this one is going to rotate it around the axis that is the central helix. The problem really comes in, like, that's very straightforward. The problem comes in when we want to add the third axis around which we can rotate. And then the trig gets a little bit lost on me. So I'm just going to kind of start copying everything over, and we'll discuss. Okay. So we're going to leave this the same, and then add an additional term. So we've got vmath. We're going to add in an additional term for our ellipse position. And actually, first, let's replace this. Well, whatever. We'll replace this with an angle. This is going to be labeled phi. Or is it phi? I can never remember. I like to say phi. Sounds like pi. But we're going to replace it with this. Do value phi. I should really start organizing these inputs, but regardless, we've got that, and then we're going to replace this with omega. Technically, we don't have to use all of this Greek. It just makes me happy. And at the end of the day, I think that's pretty reasonable. Anyway, those are also going to be single values, not a list. Another thing that I'm like, oh, I see potential, but I just don't have a use case for it yet. I don't think you want the... Or no, it's been a minute since... Okay, cool. Just making sure I'm up to date on the chat. But okay, so we've got those two angles for two of our three axes. Now we need the third. The third is always so much more difficult. Oh my gosh. I just want some value so that we can label it, because mu. Oh, mu. Oh my gosh, mu. Where are you, mu? There you are. Okay. Mu is the worst. It's the absolute worst. Because we need a whole additional term, a whole entire vector, just to modify not only like our theta and our sigma, but really just the whole space. We have to rotate the whole vector space to accommodate mu, and it's annoying. It's just annoying. So I'm just going to copy a lot of this down because it's an awful lot of tricks. So we're literally going to duplicate all of this. Glad I caught a little of your stream, but it had a... hey, thanks. I appreciate it. Hope you have a good one. And check out the rest of it later. I don't know. But have a good one. I'll talk to you later. Anyway, we're going to basically just duplicate this. I think I already said that, but whatever. And we're going to switch all of our trig around. We're going to take sine of... No, we're going to take... we're going to take sine of our... Oh my gosh, the trig! It's fine. Everything's fine. We'll get through this. I even like math. I like trig, but this is just confusing to read. Okay, we need to take sine of our sigma plus phi. So that is this. And sine of our theta plus omega. So this and that, we're going to multiply together. So this stays the same. That was dumb. I should have done that. That stays the same. We're going to now introduce mu and take sine of mu. Cool. And multiply. I think order of operations here is important, so it doesn't really matter, but just going to have it match my notes, because if I mess this up, I'm gonna be like, what the heck? Anyway, we're going to take mu, doesn't matter where it sits, sine of mu, multiply that into the mix, and we're actually going to be subtracting. This is all the x, I should say. That's why I need to label things. This is just for our x component. So because it is our x, we're going to multiply it by -1 because we're going to subtract this from our already existing x. Then we need to do a lot of the same. So y is going to be the same, but we need to take sine and cosine. So switch this to sine, and then mu is going to be cosine, and then multiply all of this in. I should really try and keep this consistent. Multiply those two together and there. Doesn't matter the order of multiplication. I know a second ago I was like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't, thinking through it now. So that's all correct, and we're going to be adding y to our y. So we don't need to multiply by anything there. And then z is a little bit funny because we're only going to take cosine. I'm just going to move. Well, it doesn't matter. We're only going to take cosine of our z and multiply that together with sine of our sigma, or sigma plus phi. Multiply all that together. There we go. It's going to look weird because right now, as it stands, all of these are defaulting to 0.5. And in radians, or in degrees, that's a very small amount, but it's a weird amount. Or no, these are in radians. So it's an extra weird amount. It's not like close to 0. I don't know what 0.5 is in radians. I can't do that off the top of my head. Who am I kidding? Anyway, we're going to set all of these to default to 0. We want no weird rotations for no reason. So reset all of these to 0. Gonna get back to this. What's going on here? Why are you being weird? It's this plus that. Oh, right. I forgot. Because we are doing this z, this is going to be the only z component. We're essentially expanding the z that we've done already. So we need to get rid of that z. So that we're just adding this z in. I've messed something else up. It shouldn't be weirdly elongated here. So why are you? There is our mu. Add that, okay. sine, we've got sine. One of the trig functions has to be flipped. I'm sure of it. That's usually, yeah. Okay. This should be cosine, sine, and sine. There we go. Okay. I'm like, when it's weird like that, it's surely there's just a trig function that I've done incorrectly. So now we have all of our rotations. So let's make A and B something a little bit more, well, doesn't much matter. Ignore this central part. That's just some finessing that we have to do. But yeah, now we can rotate it on all three axes. There we go. And this is where it's like, okay, gizmos would be great, but having them have all of the correct, like the correct orientation of the gizmo to properly represent the rotation that they would be doing, it gets a little over my head, but this works. So now we can create basically any shell we want. There are a few more steps, but this is the bulk of it, and definitely the hardest part. Like, the hardest part is really wrapping your head around these rotations. But once we get them in, it's like, oh, well, shoot, that's any snail shell for sure. And it's well worth the effort. Oh my goodness gracious. But I should point out that, like, this is all still the same logic of, like, position multiplied by a radius. That's all we've got here, because we've got, these are two components of the the position of the ellipse, so that we have all of the rotations included. So I'm going to take all of this and group it all in together. Now we have all of these inputs. Man, that's gross. Oh, I should take the time to fix that. Yeah, we're gonna have to take the time to fix that. We'll use this to replace these. Hide that, move it back into the middle so that it looks better. Reparent it so that it's correct. The rest of this, I think, is fine. It's not the best, but it's fine enough for now. We don't need to double up the inputs. We don't need this or that, which now means we're going to have to redo it so that it's phi and omega. Don't need mu. I'm going to move mu down to the bottom, because that's the order in which we have them in the highest level of our geometry nodes here. Hide that. That should be every. We gotta replace sigma and theta. So, got sigma. Copy that. Theta. There we go. We can get rid of these. Did I just mess that up? I messed that up, didn't I? Yeah, because we need this and that. Yeah, I replaced the wrong inputs, but it's fine. Those are now set up correctly. Everything here except for sigma and theta should be a single value. Single. There we go. We're going to call this ellipse pose. Fantastic. And now we have that all set up. All of our rotations and everything. Cool. Okay. We can move this over. We're going to need to incorporate theta and, of course, sigma. Nice. It's gonna bother me if things are overlapping like that. But okay, so we have our helix. Maybe even frame that. I keep calling it helix. But also, you could also call it a spiral. This is for the ellipse. We have the ellipse pose and radius. Okay, so that is the basic shell. The only addition, well, only, as if ways in which we can expand this are to add spikes. That would be the big thing to do next. What time is it? It is 11 o'clock. We've got time for that, yeah. But this is, okay, real quick, I feel like I should recap a little bit because I've done a lot of just meandering, or at least it feels like I meandered all over the place. I've tried to make this as linear as possible and as easy to understand as possible, but I understand if it has not been. So basically, what we have are a couple of lines. We're creating a mesh out of them. We've stored the factor and converted that into a range that makes sense for it to be angle, uh, the angle going around the spiral. We've multiplied that by the number of rotations that we want, which actually, as I'm looking at this in review, we could call this maybe n rotations. That's the number of rotations that we're going to have going around our spiral. It would be in terms of a full rotation because we're multiplying it by tau. If you wanted it to be in terms of half a rotation, multiply it by pi because that's half a tau. So in rotations, I'm going to move that up to the top in rotations. Then we have alpha. Why don't we call this the not sure what you would call that specifically. It's the angle. Uh, what it results in is the tightness of the spiral going up the shell. I don't think that's a great way to say it, but that then beta is the angle of like how far out does it open up into a cone. We have A, which is our aperture. How large the opening is. And of course, all of these work in concert to create more specific shapes. But we have that. We have A and B, our major and minor axes of the ellipse. Then we have all three axes of rotation to form basically any shell. And that's it for the most part. Yeah, I'm just trying to think now how much further I want to take this because there are a lot of ways that we could continue to modify this to be more specific or even more general. So you could take your theta or your sigma and use those to modify the offsets of the surface, make it bumpy, make it spiky. There are a few ways to do that in the blog post that I've written and that I based all of this off of. Well, I say a few ways. There's one way, with the addition of a couple of equations that get a little bit chaotic, but it's worth it. And I've actually expanded on it in order to make it so that it's a little bit more dynamic than the original blog post. Is it worth getting into that? I don't know. Do you guys want to see me add spikes to this shell? Otherwise, I might call it there, and then we'll discuss maybe adding material to it because I think that would be fun to do. Something that I should mention is that if we take a look at the wireframe, it's pretty sparse towards the beginning of the shell, and then up towards the top. It gets pretty darn dense, and that's just an unfortunate ramification of the fact that we're adjusting the radius as we move along it. So it's just a natural consequence of how we're doing the math. But one way that we could fix this is by taking this factor. We're going to create a little bit more space, and we're going to add in a custom node that I've made, which is a curve bias node. What this does is it reads a couple of float curves. I could replace that with a function, but it gets the job done. Essentially, what it does is takes a factor, some value between 0 and 1. It assumes that it's linear, but it doesn't have to be linear. In this case, it's not. So we're going to make it more linear. So we're going to add a bias. And if we crank that up to 1, it's not going to do the job perfectly, but basically reset that to 0. We can use this to manipulate the factor of each point and just kind of push them to be, to have a bias. So if we increase this up to 1, we'll push a lot of this geometry out from the middle and down around the shell, so that it's just a little bit more evenly spaced. We could also reduce, perhaps, well, definitely this around the aperture. We don't need 128 points going around to draw a well subdivided ellipse. I think 32 would, maybe that's a little low, but like we just don't need that much geometry. I just threw in some big numbers so that we'd have enough to see a nice smooth shell to begin with, but we can really start to finesse this. These are also parameters that we could have in our geometry input, if you wanted to at least. This is also something that I could see me turning this into a primitive, because like, I don't know, I think it's pretty darn cool, and like, why not have a shell primitive? Uh, but anyway, I was going to reduce the number of points along the original spiral. 45 is way too low, but like we could do 64. Whoops. 64. Half as much as what we had before. Let's just go into shaded mode. Like, that looks pretty good. Just depends on what you're going for. Also, something to keep in mind is that, like, well, this is a this is just one surface. So if we turn on face orientation, it's actually even backwards, which is unfortunate. At the end here, we should flip faces, and I think that has a lot to do with, like, mute that for a moment. This has a lot to do with the fact that we're going negative on the position. So if we turned off, no, all right, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Regardless, we can fix it by just flipping the faces. There's probably one term somewhere towards the beginning that makes it so that we're doing it that way. Actually, now I'm just curious. Now I'm just going to play with it for a hot second. If we flip that, no, it's got to be in the position. Yeah, it doesn't matter what the initial geometry is doing. Anyway, flip the faces. Nice, easy solution. Doesn't really matter. And then also, because this is just a square that we've reset the position to make it so that it is a shell, there is this edge here. It's very obvious in shaded view. There are a couple solutions. The easiest is just to merge by distance, but that's going to give us some trouble, right? Because even if we do that, like, yes, we've gotten rid of that seam, and now it's a tube as opposed to just a square. But up here, depends on how close your points get, how dense your mesh is, but the points where all of our geometry overlap could get merged together, and that could mess up your topology, depending on the use case for this shell, right? So we do need to, let's see, face neighbors. I think that's the one I want. We should take a comparison. Just one way to do it, mind you. Comparison of the number of face neighbors, either vert count or face count. Just depends on which domain you want to do it on. But going to say if it's less than, oh, well, if we've merged by distance, it's not going to do anything. So we need to take a look at flip faces. And then if it's less than... Okay. Okay. Sure. Fine. Be that way. Oh, there we go. Now we've got some true... Okay. Less than 4. Yeah, that works. This will select the entire seam as well as the outside edge. Also, this is reading out on faces right now because we're looking at faces. If we look at verts again, it's just going to be annoying about it. We could cast to the right domain, but regardless, this should work fine for our merging. There we go. It leaves both this opening and the very top open. And we could use that for, say, like giving it some thickness. So, like, we could extrude the mesh, then use this same operation again to merge all of the edges together. Anyway, the point is, there was a seam there. Now I'm rambling, but there was a seam there, and now we don't have a seam. So, cool. Just things to clean up the mesh, you know, maybe make it a little bit more proper. Do I want to play with spikes? I don't know that I want to play with spikes. That gets a little bit weird. You can add spikes. I'm just going to point to my Patreon blog because I've explained it in detail there. And I don't know that it'll be terribly fun to add all the spikes in right now. And that'll significantly increase the number of variables that we have. And I think this is good enough for a live stream. The last thing that I really want to do, though, is add a material, because we should be able to use, well, I know we can use these parameters that we've generated in order to create an interesting looking material. So let's take our factor, and I want to add one more parameter. Do we want to do that? Yeah, we should do that. It'll be easiest if we just create a new parameter for our factor. We're going to call that F. Take the factor from our spiral geometry, plug it into F, so that now here at the very end we have a named attribute that's normalized, right? It goes 0 to 1, nice and smooth, all the way up. As opposed to, like, if we took our theta, we'd have to do a little bit of additional math, which is fine, like just divided by the number of rotations times tau. But if we just create a new parameter, it's the same thing. So anyway, we've got that, and now we can open up our shader editor. Pretty sure we're in Eevee. Yeah, I'm going to leave this in Eevee for now because it's just going to be easier on my computer to render while we're live and what have you. Don't want to overwork my machine. That would be very bad. Anyway, we're going to create a new material, and don't forget, set material. This is always my downfall. Every single time. New material. We'll call it shell mat. There we go. And now we can take some attributes. I'm going to need to copy. That's the downfall with using these Greek characters. There are alt codes for being able to type that. My keyboard's a little bit weird, and it can be difficult to use alt codes to type in special characters, so I'm just going to copy paste all of these. So now we have theta, sigma, and I want f, our factor, in here. So now we can use these parameters to create a material. Cool. I'm going to take theta. No, we're going to work with sigma first. Let's take sigma and plug it into a noise texture set to 1D. If we take a look at that, right now with no inputs, this is just going to give us one color for the whole thing. Also going to turn off face orientation. We don't need that right now. It's just going to show one color for the whole thing. If we plug in sigma, now we have a bunch of bands going around our shell. Cool, right? It's going to have a little bit denser bands going around where the seam is because we've now joined them together, which means that it's going to go from 0 around to pi, and then in that very small section, pi to 0 again. We could maybe store sigma on the face corners. This is actually something that, like, I've known it's an issue. Usually what I do is just add to sigma, multiply add. I was going to add an add node, but multiply add. We can just add to it to offset it. If we take a look at, well, okay. Got to think through this. Okay, we're going to mute the merge by distance node. Decrease the multiplier so that we see that gap. And then add to it. So now we can see we're offsetting it, and then just hide the seam in the inner spiral. There you go. We need to reset that to tau. And then if we go back into shaded view, we don't see that seam anymore, but we also don't see it because we're not merging by distance. You can maybe see right here on the inside here, this is where our seam is. So if I get rid of the merge by distance, we don't see that anymore. But if we have merge by distance, it's a problem. Another solution, let me get rid of this add so that we have the issue on the outside again, is, like I was saying a moment ago, store named attribute. We're going to switch this to face corner and then use named attribute sigma. Let's name this sigma mat, maybe, just so that we can differentiate between the two. And now that that's on face corners, we should be able to type in here. I have not actually tested this. Okay, yeah. Since we've set it to our face corners, even though everything's merged, face corners won't have that weird little bit where it goes from pi back to 0, and that's along one face. It'll do it, well, it'll do it properly, essentially. But cool, so now we have some noise moving around the aperture of our shell. I think it's a little bit, well, yeah, I think it's cool if this noise repeated so that like we had a little bit of symmetry going around the shell. I don't know if that's technically realistic, like we could just stick with this noise, but in order to have some level of symmetry, if we want it, what we can do is just do we want to multiply? No, I think we can just take sine because it is technically 0 to tau. So that should work. If we want maybe more repetitions, because that would be 1 repetition, we could, not maximum, we want multiply that by 3, let's say. And then now we have 3 of these. I'll make it a little bit more obvious. Multiply it by 5. Now you can really see we've got those repeating stripes. Let's actually use this to mix our color, and then we can set just 2 distinct colors for a moment so that we can see the difference. And then, yeah, we've got a repeating pattern going along the aperture of our shell. Cool. So that's working. We can maybe pick a little bit nicer colors now, make that a little bit darker. Doesn't really matter. So we can do that. We could also, like, all of this from here on out is just artistic interpretation. So do whatever the heck you want to, bud. But we're going to use a float curve to make to up the contrast in our values. It's just smoothly going from 0 to 1 fairly linearly. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of an S curve to really up that contrast. Make it so that we can see those stripes. Maybe increase the value. Could increase the saturation too. Maybe pick. I mean, just do whatever you want to. I'm just making stuff up at this point. This is all off the dome. Like, I've done this once before, but do whatever. So that's that. I think it would be interesting if, say, this wasn't just one dimensional. Could be two dimensional, but now we need to not compare, combine x and y. So we'll have x, and this will basically make it one dimensional again, but we could introduce a second parameter, and this would make it so that our noise changes as we move along the curve. At least it should be changing. We can check this by increasing y, and there we go. Okay, now it's changing as we're moving along the curve of the shell. I don't want that to be that drastic. I just wanted a little bit of variation because I don't know. I haven't looked at a ton of shells in recent days, but I think it makes sense to have just a little bit of variation. There we go. That's nice. My brain is like, well, that's close enough to pi over 2. Just make it pi over 2. Anyway, that is just a touch of color. Something else we could do is maybe extrude our mesh. I want to do this before the set material, really for no other reason than just like so that we only need one set material node. Anyway, we're going to extrude the mesh. We don't want to do it on individuals. This will make it so that we have a much bigger shell, but we'll scale that down. Actually, going to use the factor here to multiply the factor so that where it is 0, I think we're going to want to subtract 1, but anyway, where it is 0, we're not going to multiply it by anything. And then at the very beginning, we'll multiply it by the amount that we want. This will give us some fall off. Yeah, it's doing it backwards though. So this is real thin, that's very thick. I want the opposite of this. So that do 1 minus multiply. Is that doing that correctly? Yeah, okay. It's doing it correctly. The goal is to just not have a ton of overlapping weird geometry. So like if we just had it like this, well, since it's negative, it's going to be weird, but I don't want the small part here to start to overlap the other rotations. And so just to make it a little bit more technically correct, we're going to multiply it by the factor 1 minus the factor. So anyway, there we go with that. Now we want to join our geometry. Let me just check the face orientation real quick. Okay, face orientation is correct. We're going to join that with the original geometry. We're going to need to flip the faces of the original so that the interior has the correct normals. And then we need to do one more merge by distance, and we're going to use the same logic so that we're only merging the edge of the shell, both at the top and bottom. And now we've given our shell some thickness. That was the goal here. Add a little bit of thickness. We'll plug that into set material, go back into shaded. Reason we have that is so that now, actually, we're not going back into our shader just yet. We need to store one more named attribute. This is going to be on the interior. Yeah, we'll say this is on the inside. We're going to store a Boolean, set it to true. That means that for the other part of our geometry here, that will be set to 0. And we can use this Boolean on the inside. we can use this in our shader to switch between colors. So we'll use this mix. Sure, we'll leave that color for a moment. It's not going to stay that way. But we're going to use the attribute we just made of inside. Inside. I hope I spelled it correctly in both places. There we go. And so now we're able to switch between the color for the outside and the interior of the shell. We'll use this for a couple other things too, like say the roughness or bump. All of the little details that will really make this an interesting looking shell. Okay. And speaking of, why don't we do bump next? So we're going to introduce a bump node, use sigma, or not sigma, theta to drive another noise texture. This is going to be one-dimensional. Plug that into W. We'll need to adjust the scale, but I'll worry about that in a hot second. Then we can adjust the distance in a hot second. Let's just plug that bump into the normal. We don't see anything at the moment. Let's make sure we're in the proper view though. And if we increase this, we should see bump. Looks like no. We should see it in cycles. Or am I just not doing this right? Hold on 1 second. Is that not correct? Oh, it might just need to multiply this to get some contrast. Increase that. No? All right, hold on. What am I doing? What's wrong with this picture? Maybe just switch the attribute. This should work. We should be seeing some bump. Actually, let's just... Yeah, no, that's doing that correctly. That's doing that correctly. Oh, we were looking at the color. I thought we were looking at the shader. That's my bad. And if we look at the shader, it's hard to see anything without any light. So we'll just rotate that to be something interesting. Doesn't really much matter. But okay. Okay, that is so much better. I'm thinking I'm crazy here. But okay. So that is our bump. You can see, I'm hoping this is coming across well on YouTube, but we have some lines here. You can particularly see it where the light is shining on the surface there. There we go. Let's increase that bump just a little bit. Like, it doesn't need to be crazy. But I want to make sure that it's visible. Now, we might actually leave it as is, but okay. So we've got that. I do want to adjust the roughness. It should be reasonably rough, and actually if we increase the roughness to where I would want it to be, we don't see the bump anymore. So this is where we'll increase the distance on the bump node to create those normals. Might even turn down the number of iterations and scale and all of that. I'll just play with it in general, but regardless, I think that's starting to look pretty neat. Okay. With that lighting, we don't see the interior whatsoever. Why don't we adjust the angle? Which angle would that be? Mu? Of course it's mu. Oh, mu. Yeah, that looks fine. Maybe switch it to cycles. Does that look better? GPU. Nah, I need to rotate the light some more. I'm just gonna finesse this for a minute. Uh, just because I want to make something that looks neat. After all that effort, we deserve to enjoy this, right? Maybe it just looks wrong because the color is rather dark. So let's copy this, place that in there. It's not the color that I want, but it's the color we've got for the moment. Brighten it up a little bit, adjust the hue. I don't want it to look too flesh tone, but like that is the realm that I feel like a lot of shells exist in, right? Anyway, so we've got that. I want to adjust the, well, okay, we need to switch the bump. We need to mix the bump, I should say. It's not a switch in shaders, but we need to mix the bump so that we don't have any bump on the inside. So let's get in another mix node. This is going to be left to float, and then we'll use the inside node again as the factor so that we have 0 bump on the inside, all of the bump on the outside. Fantastic. Probably use the same node, doesn't matter. Just trying to keep things clean. Anyway, so we've got that. Then we'll need to switch for our roughness. So we'll have a mix. Plug that into the roughness. And again, I want the inside to adjust this. And we can just say that it'll be pretty rough on the outside. We don't need like a fancy function for this. And then maybe just a little bit rough. Not very rough, but a little bit on the inside. I think it makes sense for this to be kind of smooth. Relatively smooth. Shoot, I might even just have a different set of noise. Plug that in there. Going to map the range. This is me really nitpicking here. But we don't want it to be the full range from 0 to 1. I'm going to have it be 0.1 to 0.3-ish. So that there's just a little bit of noise. I don't even know that you can really see that. But I think it's neat. I'm also going to increase the number of subdivisions just because it's bothering me that I can see the polygons around the edge here. But okay. And that's a snail shell. Like, I don't know what else you guys would want to see me add to it as far as the material goes, but that is basically everything, and we can adjust it in any which way we want to, really. Yeah, and I'm realizing now we didn't even like really mess with UVs or anything. Sometimes I combine our two angles into one vector that is basically a custom UV, but we could just play with them individually as we've done here, and it works. So yeah. Um yeah, why not do like just a quick render just cuz create a plane, maybe grab this. That is the thing. The origin will always be at the apex of the shell. So you just have to keep that in mind when messing around with it. How would this lay naturally? Does that make sense? Probably not, but I think it works. Rotate that just a little bit, just a little bit. I don't need to finesse this that much. Just it to look like it lines up okay. I'm also going to take a look at the sunlight and increase the angle here. I think it looks nice when it's a little bit softer with the shadows. Can also scale that. Whoa. Scale that up. I guess I went negative. Whoops. But scale that up for our surface. You know what? Why not? Not spread. Whoops. Not spreadsheet. I want the asset browser. I'm just gonna scroll through real quick. This is very much unplanned, but I just want like some kind of a material that looks okay underneath it just to really finish up the like just to have like a nice output, right? To show what we've made. Ooh, like I kind of like that angle. Like this kind of obfuscates a lot of the shell. I could also design a different shell. Uh, but yeah, maybe we want a different shell than what we've got here. But anyway, I want to quickly just choose a nice material for the ground. Drawing this out because I'm looking through it. I'm like, does what would look good? What would look good and not too noisy? Like maybe a marble. That looks neat. That looks neat, right? Like, what's going on here? Hold on. Shade smooth should be turned on, but it might not be for all of the geometry that we merged together, right? So let's just set shade smooth faces. What is going on here? Could also do it by angle. Gives us a bit of a hard edge there, but it gets rid of the weird triangulation that we had before. Yeah, like that's some weird triangulation. Don't love it. But maybe that's good enough. As long as it doesn't draw the eye too much. I mean, that hard edge kind of draws the eye, but whatever. I'm getting way too into the details here. Anyway, point is just to render a neat looking image. So let's grab our camera out here. Might need to play with the sun. Do. Could probably use a better lighting setup anyway. Like actually use 3 points, like 3 light setup, whatever it's called. Like I love it when the shadow falls on the opening so that you get some of that reflection, but also some contrast on the inside, and it well illuminates everything else. Like I think that looks neat. Again, I'm not going for anything too fancy, so I should really stop nitpicking all of the things. I just want to have a nice output. Kind of want a square uh, composition too. But I just want a nice output for the end of the stream. Yeah, that's pretty neat. I don't know. It's just something. But anyway, that is basically everything I wanted to talk about. We didn't get into adding spikes and bumps, but there's a lot that I could expand on with that. So if we did, I would probably go for another hour and a half. And uh, I need to get to the rest of my day. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I guess I will see all of you in the next one. Bye. And thanks for hanging out. Also, I never know how to end streams exactly, but thanks for hanging out. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.